Thank you so much for the invitation. It's really nice to come over to UCLA and not have the trip involve vandalism at all. It really takes some of the stress out of it, so I appreciate it. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about the cost of striving to be ethical. Now, we all know that trying to be a good person can cost us. It can, if we're a leader and we're trying to be a good person, we're trying to demonstrate compassion. We may be perceived as weak. People may take advantage of us. If we're climbing the corporate ladder, any sort of ladder, well, not any ladder, any social ladder, any hierarchy, if we're not willing to screw over other people, that can hold us back relative to where we would have been had we been willing to take advantage of people, stab people in the back, etc. The Onion did a great article on this, saying that high integrity, moral decency has cost idiot men millions. But when we think of these types of behaviors, the behaviors that we forswear when we decide to be a good person, most of the behaviors that come to mind are pretty obviously bad. So accounting fraud, bribery, pyramid schemes, and again, stabbing people in the back. So these are all sorts of behaviors that, yes, we could engage in these behaviors and perhaps there would be benefits to us. But if we're going to be good, if we're going to be governed by our conscience, we're not going to engage in these sorts of behaviors. But what I want to study, oh, there's Maeva. Sorry. That's weird. Okay, well, we're only going to get Rebecca's name, which makes me a little concerned. What I want to talk about is a different set of behaviors that we might not think about people forswearing as a result of their desire to be good people. And I'm going to explore three basic ideas that I've worked on with a number of, let's see, there we go, co-authors. The first one looks at how people who are particularly prone to guilt, that is, people who anticipate feeling guilty in response to various situations, might be likely to be costing themselves in that they're not forming interdependent relationships with highly competent other people. And then recently, my colleague Maeva, who is joining us for the talk, and I have been joining Laura Yu in studying how this guilt proneness might also lead us to stay too long in these failing relationships. So failing, our focus for the moment is failing business relationships. It might be failing romantic relationships down the road. But the idea that's intriguing us right now is that we might feel so connected to people that we're not able to do the rational analysis. It's that our sense of guilt has us staying in these relationships that are really not working. And the third project I'll talk about today is how the desire to help other people, the desire to work on pro-social initiatives might make us pretty bad decision makers in that we might be more likely to escalate our commitment to failing courses of action that have pro-social components than we would be to initiatives or projects that are primarily for our own benefit. And I'll talk toward the end of the talk about why I think that's the case and the support that we found so far. Okay, so the first project is the one advertised in the initial title that I had, which is Guilt, Proneness, and the Avoidance of Harmful Outcome-Interdependence. This is a paper that Taya Cohen and I will have coming out in next month's Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Okay, so when we think about the criteria that we use to choose our colleagues, one of the first things that comes to mind is competence, right? We want somebody who's going to be competent, somebody who's going to be good, not struggle in a position. We don't want to have to take care of that other person. We genuinely want our department or our organization to function better, so competence is a good thing. Now, we know from a lot of research looking at hiring decisions and group membership decisions that that's not the only thing we care about. It's not just simply a matter of let's get the most competent individual. We're also concerned about how well that person works in teams. We think about how much that person is like us. Are we going to get along? Do they share surface or deep level characteristics with us so that it's going to make our work easier to coordinate, or make our day more enjoyable, or Any number of other factors might be related to this desire for homophily. We also look at relational ability, so maybe they're not like us, but if somebody's really easy to get along with, that's going to give them a benefit, an advantage in the hiring process. Interpersonal attraction, we want high status, others, et cetera. There are a long list of things that we consider when we're looking to hire somebody. Now, if we control for all these other characteristics that people know about and look at competence, there's still a positive effect for competence. So generally, competence is a good thing unless it's going to be a threat to us. But what I'm going to suggest today is that for people who are really, really guilt-prone, that competence may actually be a negative. It may be that they are avoiding partnerships with people who are really, really competent. And the reason why has to do with equity theory, and I'll get to that in 1 second. But at this point in the talk, you may well be considering, well, am I a person who's particularly prone to guilt? It's hard to tell because I don't know how much guilt Clark anticipates or experiences on a daily basis. I only know what's going on in my own head. So I've relied on a couple of scales, primarily Taya Cohen's guilt proneness scales, and that has 4 different dimensions. I'm going to show you one of the dimensions here. This is guilt proneness negative behavior evaluation. Oh, and I should say, feel absolutely free to interrupt me with questions at any point. I'm very used to that style. So if anything isn't clear or if you have a question, just let me know. Okay, so 4 subscales to this guilt proneness scale. The first one is guilt negative behavior evaluation. So this measures the extent to which I feel bad about things that I've done. So let me give you some examples of this. After realizing you have received too much change at a store, you decide to keep it because the sales clerk doesn't notice. What is the likelihood that you would feel uncomfortable about keeping the money? Some of us would feel uncomfortable. Some of us would feel like, well, they're getting the benefit of the doubt so many other times. I probably overpaid for things that they should have been discounting. We vary. You secretly commit a felony. What is the likelihood that you would feel remorse about breaking the law? Now, this begs the question, what felony are we talking about? I gave this a similar talk at Berkeley last year, and about half the crowd was thinking drugs, and then there were a few people thinking murder. And the people who were thinking drugs were making very harsh judgments of the people thinking of murder. So I don't know what you have in your head. People who take the scale are free to imagine whatever felony they like. At a coworker's housewarming party, you spill red wine on their new cream-colored carpet. You cover the stain with a chair so that nobody notices your mess. What's the likelihood that you would feel that the way you acted was pathetic? And finally, you lie to people, but they never find out. What's the likelihood that you would feel terrible about the lies you told? Okay. One of the themes you may notice here is that these are mostly private transgression. The sales clerk doesn't notice that you're taking too much change. The people who host the party, the coworker who hosts the party, doesn't notice the red stain. So guilt is generally thought of in private terms. So it's not about how ashamed I am of these actions in front of these other people. That's more associated with the emotion of shame than it is with guilt. The other key distinction between shame and guilt, in the psychology literature anyway, has to do with the behavioral tendencies associated with it. In particular, guilt leads people to want to repair their actions. So if I do something inconsiderate and I inconvenience you, if I'm highly guilt prone, I'm going to want to find a way to make that up so that I don't feel so guilty. It involves a negative evaluation of my behavior, but not necessarily a negative evaluation of myself as a person. Shame, on the other hand, is negative evaluation of myself as a person. And if I do something like inconvenience you and I feel shame about that, first of all, I'm gonna think that I'm a terrible person. There's more of a general self-evaluation. And also I'm gonna want to withdraw instead of repair the transgression. So Because of this, some of the literature in organizational behavior and in management more generally has talked about guilt being a very positive thing in terms of leaders. So managers who have a high sense of guilt or who are really prone to guilt are going to be more effective leaders than people who are not so prone to guilt. And I'll talk about why that would be in one sense. Okay, in 1 second. All right, equity theory tells us that people strive to avoid inequity in their relationships. It feels very uncomfortable to us. It feels uncomfortable both when the other person is getting more than their fair share and we're feeling screwed over. That leads us to feel resentment and anger. It also can feel very uncomfortable when we're over-rewarded in some domain. If there are 3 of us working on a group project and I'm getting a huge reward for my efforts, maybe I'm getting all the credit, that can lead me to feel guilty. And it's because of that link that guilt proneness seems to lead to better management. So guilt proneness has been shown by Frank Flynn and Becky Schonberg to lead to a number of positive effects. First thing, it leads managers to work harder. So it leads people to work harder. It leads people to feel more connected to their organization and to take better care of their employees. They want to make sure they're supporting their employees because guilt proneness fundamentally is concern about the potential negative impact that one's own actions can have on others. And so if somebody's highly prone to guilt, they want to make sure they're not putting other people in a position where they're hurt by their own individual actions. Okay, so that's the story so far. Guilt proneness leads to more effective leadership, more conscientiousness amongst workers, just better leadership generally from the perspective of there being more effort. Okay, so as I said, guilt proneness leads to this heightened sensitivity to the impact of one's own actions on others. This leads to and is associated with a fear of letting other people down, right? If I'm really concerned about my actions on others, I'm going to focus in part on the negative consequences that my actions have. And if by exerting effort, if I can stay at the office late until 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night and make it so that my employees are going to be in a better position to succeed, make it so that my employees are going to have a better work life, I'm going to do that because I don't want to be responsible for putting my employee in an undesirable position. So I work harder. And as a result, I turn out to be an exemplary leader. Okay, this is a story that Frank Flynn and Rebecca Schonberg have shown in a couple of their papers. So leads to all sorts of good things. When Taya and I read this, we thought, yeah, that may be the case. Guilt proneness seems like it would motivate a lot of really good, admirable behavior, both in the workplace and outside of the workplace. But it seems like if you're really prone to guilt, why would you want to put yourself in that leadership position? I don't think I would. I wouldn't want to be responsible for 20 people's livelihoods or happiness or something or anything like that. I would rather make sure that I am not in a position where my actions could have these potential negative consequences for others. As a result, we posited that guilt proneness could lead people to avoid interdependent relationships. Okay, I should be clear here about what I mean by interdependent relationships because there are a number of different varieties of interdependence. There's task interdependence, and that's really working hand in hand on a project with somebody else. So if we're building some model of something, if I'm working on some part simultaneously as somebody else is working on that same part, but from a different angle or a different process, that's task interdependence. We're physically working together. Outcome interdependence means that the outcomes I received are linked to the outcomes that you receive from a project. We need not be working in the same room. We need not be working in the same physical space to be outcome interdependent. If you think about an organization, let's say it's got a marketing department and it's got an operations department. If the marketing department is fantastic and the operations department is truly terrible, Well, there's positive outcome interdependence because the company is not going to do well. There's this weak link in the chain. They're reliant on one another. So that's positive outcome interdependence. Negative outcome interdependence is still a link between the outcomes, but the success of one is tied to the failure of the other. So if you think of a simple used car negotiation, for example, that can be a case of negative outcome interdependence because there's just one issue involved, price. And if the price goes up, that's good for one person, bad for the other person. The type of interdependence that I think is going to be most effective here is this positive outcome interdependence when we're working on teams, for example. Okay, and specifically, Tay and I thought that guilt proneness should affect interdependence when rewards are contingent on performance. So something has to be at stake. If there's absolutely nothing at stake, we're not going to find very interesting results. Second, these effects should be strongest when your self-efficacy, your sense of self-confidence or competence is lowest. So if I'm looking to start a collaboration with Maida. Maida's a doctoral student, fantastic doctoral student. I think very, very highly of her. Imagine that I am not at all confident in my abilities. Do I want to lure her into a 2-year project that's going to likely waste her time, in which I'm likely to slow her down? Well, if I'm highly guilt prone, I'm going to avoid that altogether. If I'm not guilt prone, I may think, yeah, absolutely, I'm going to ride on her coattails through this project. It's fantastic. I can kind of free ride, or even if I try my best, I'm not going to be as good, but I'm going to benefit from her competence in this domain. On the other hand, if I'm really confident in my own abilities, and I see her as competent as well, then I'm probably not going to have such a problem forming that collaboration, even if I'm guilt prone, because I don't have the expectation that my joining the project will drag her down. Is that clear? Okay. So formally, we hypothesized that highly guilt-prone people will be less likely than people less prone to guilt to enter into partnerships with people they perceive to be more competent than themselves. So we did a couple MTurk studies to begin this series of studies, and then moved it in the lab, and then finally in study 4 looked at real life relationships. So bear with me on a couple of MTurk studies, and then we'll get into some richer social contexts. Okay, so we had 116 subjects on MTurk. Fill out guilt and shame proneness measures. You guys have already seen the guilt proneness measures that they took. Here are the shame proneness measures. You rip an article out of a journal in the library and take it with you. Your teacher discovers what you did and tells the librarian and your entire class what is the likelihood that this would make you feel like a bad person. You give a bad presentation at work. Your boss says, look, it's your fault that the company lost the contract. You gave this bad presentation. How likely is it that you'd feel incompetent? You exaggerate your damages in a lawsuit. Months later, your lies are discovered. You're charged with perjury. What is the likelihood that you would think that you are a despicable human being? And then you make a mistake. Coworkers blame. The coworker finds out about it, confronts you. What's the likelihood that you would feel like a coward? So in contrast to the guilt proneness items, again, it's more public. So the other person's aware, the victim of the behavior is aware, and there's a negative self-evaluation. Okay, so after we collected these items and gave them some filler materials, we asked people, told people that they were going to be making a choice, and that they had a couple of options. They were going to take an accounting quiz, and they had already provided information about their expertise in a number of different fields, from geography to biology, accounting. We wanted to get a sense of their competence and have an excuse or have credible grounds to say that we're going to be pairing them with another person whom we know is good in accounting or whom we know is bad in accounting. So they have two options for payments for this accounting quiz. First one, they're paid based on their performance alone. They get 50 cents per question, right? There's something like 20 questions. Or they could be paid based on their performance, the average of their performance and that of a partner, so that each of them gets 25 cents for his or her own performance and 25 cents for his or her counterpart's performance. So essentially, you take the average, multiply it by 50 cents. The counterpart doesn't get a choice in this, so you're making the decision. Do you want interdependence or do you want independence? We give people a practice question after we've described this task, and this practice question is, which government body is formally responsible for overseeing accounting standards? And it turns out to be the SEC. Not that important about the details, but it gives participants a sense of how hard this accounting quiz is going to be. So we can get them kind of talking in the same terms. Some people may feel like, yeah, I'm an expert in accounting, but not know anything. But once they get this question, they should have a better sense of whether they really are knowledgeable about accounting. We then ask them some questions about their own self-efficacy. So how well do they think that they're going to do in an accounting quiz, and then ask them to decide. Here's the decision. We lay out this counterpart. His name's Craig. He likes golf. Yes?
At what point do they get you said they got information about the background of their partner.
Right.
At what point in that order do they get that?
Yeah, so they get it right after they fill out the self-efficacy questionnaire. So they fill out the they take the guilt proneness questionnaire. They provide information on, like, what's your self-rated expertise in all of these fields. Then they get a description of the problem. Then they're presented with the self-efficacy questions. Then they're presented with this description and are asked to make the choice. And here's the choice. Would you like your payment to be based on your performance alone, or prefer that your performance and your partner's performance be averaged? And as you can see here, Craig is a relative expert in accounting. This is a 1 to 7 scale, and they were shown that it was a 1 to 7 scale. And what we see here is that people who were high self-efficacy, so those people who think of themselves as relative accounting experts, don't have that much interest in pairing themselves with the other person. So the vertical axis is likelihood to choose interdependence. So those people who feel good about their own accounting knowledge are less likely than those who feel bad about their own accounting knowledge to choose to be interdependent. This is not very surprising or interesting. What's more interesting is what happens to this line. This is for people with low self-efficacy, so they know that they're not an accounting expert. As they get more and more guilt-prone, they become less and less likely to choose interdependence. It trails off some. It's not the strongest effect in this study. It was an initial study. We've done something like 5 other ones. But we see initial evidence of the pattern here. In study 2, we wanted to see, well, is this just about interdependence versus independence, or could it be that it's more broad than that, or if it's broader than that? It could be that it is that the case that often we are forced to be interdependent. We need to be interdependent with somebody. We need to choose some sort of partner. So if you're forced to choose a partner and you are guilt-prone and not that confident in your own abilities, do you choose less competent partners than do other people, or than do people who are less high in guilt-prone? So we're looking at the choice of which partner rather than whether your partner. And here are 2 example choices. Tia, in this case, very strong in accounting, whereas Jennifer is very weak in accounting. Here we have a graph, and again, the vertical axis here measures the competence of the selected partner. For people high in self-efficacy, we get this strange effect that I don't totally understand. If you have any ideas, I'd be all ears. So the more guilt-prone they are, the higher the competence of the selected partner. It's not significant, which is why I haven't invested much effort in following it up. But the more central part of our story and what I was interested in testing is what happens to these people who are low in self-efficacy. And we find that the more guilt-prone that they become, the less competent their selected partner is. And I should say that I'm just splitting these into low guilt proneness and high guilt proneness into two categorical groups for the purposes of graphical presentation. In fact, it's standardized. Yes?
Well, just wondering, wouldn't it, it seems like on the face of it, explanation of the increase in high self-efficacy people choosing to work with a partner when they're guilt-prone is that they don't want to feel guilty for not having helped when they could, right?
Oh, I see.
You know,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
a whiz
possible.
at accounting, and if I don't share, then I'm the jerk.
Well, but wouldn't you feel, if you're a wizard accounting and you're guilt prone, wouldn't you choose, would you maybe feel more obligated to help the people who really do need help?
Well, I guess it would depend on how much of a whiz I felt I was.
Okay,
I might feel
That's an
that
interesting
I could help
sentence.
everybody, I don't know.
okay. Yes,
I wonder whether it's just a confound with agreeableness here.
okay. Yeah, so we measured that in one of our studies and didn't find effects for agreeableness, but it's a very good question. Let me think about it for a second.
I mean, if I'm high agreeableness
Right.
and high self-efficacy, you ask me, would you like to be interdependent? Then I might feel, well, yeah, I can help somebody.
Okay.
Yeah, but both of those, I mean, this
That's
result
me.
this result is about the quality of the partner, right? So
Right.
It's
With
not
whom
just
are-
do you want to help someone, but do you choose a skilled partner over a less skilled partner?
Yeah.
So if you were, again, as Scott said earlier, if you're really agreeable, you might say, well, I have these awesome skills, I'm going to choose the less competent individual so that I can bestow upon them the benefits of my competence.
Yeah. If this line were similar in slope to this line, I'd be very concerned about that. Yes?
Did you also, do you also look at shame in this case?
Yes, so in all these studies we looked at shame. In many cases, if you look at shame independently, you'll find similar effects. If you have both shame and guilt proneness in the same regression, it's guilt proneness that produces the effects, and shame is reduced to non-significance. But yeah, we control for that. Okay, as I said, MTurk studies so far, we've taken it, as the reviewers of the paper pointed out, taken a very social emotion of guilt and measured it in a very artificial environment. So this study, we wanted to look at it in the lab. We brought students in groups of 4, and we tried to create these fast friendships. Many of you may be familiar with the fast friends conversations, but probably not everybody. These are a list of questions that get people to talk to one another in much more interesting ways than they might if they were just told to sit down and have a conversation. We might get questions like, so which part of Orange County are you from? I'm like, well, I'm from Irvine. Cool. So these are questions like, if you could have dinner with anyone in the world, with whom would you have dinner? Why? Do you want to be famous? If so, in what way? And it really gets people to open up and feel connected to one another in pretty short time horizons. So we had participants come in groups of 4. So we had 2 of them talking to each other, forming these fast friendships. And then we had them create these origami hearts for money. So this is origami, as most of you know, is paper folding. And we told them, and did, pay them based on how many hearts that they made. But we gave them a practice period in which they could make these origami hearts. Now, a month in advance of this, in our pre-term survey, we had measured their guilt proneness so that we'd have some temporal separation between the measure of guilt proneness and the decision. After the 10-minute practice period, where they're alone in each case they're alone in a room making these origami hearts, we told people that their counterpart made 4 more hearts than they made. So I or the experimenter would look at the number of hearts, which might be 3, it might be 7, and we'd say, oh, that's good, your counterpart made 7. There were 2 cases that we dropped. These were origami experts who created more than 3 standard deviations worth of origami hearts. In fact, one of them got very, very excited with me. She's like, oh, I didn't know how to do this technique. It's really cool how in step 11 you do this. And I'm like, uh-huh. Yeah, your data's not going to be any good. So it wouldn't have been believable to tell them that somebody else got more because they were paper-making machines. Anyway, we manipulated the payment structure, additive versus disjunctive. And what this means is that in the additive conditions, they were paid they had the option of being paid based on an average of their output and their partner's output, as was the case in the first couple of experiments. In the disjunctive one, it is basically based on the stronger of the 2 performances. So if I'm the relatively unskilled person at origami, my performance decrements aren't going to bring down the other person. And if guilt is about concern of the negative effects of my own actions on other people, well, we shouldn't see an effect here because your actions aren't going to have, even if you choose to pair with that other person, you're really not going to bring them down. So you should see attenuated effects, if any, in this condition. And then we offered participants the choice whether they wanted to pair their payments with a counterpart. And what we see here with the probability of choosing interdependence along the vertical axis is the familiar effect in this additive payment structure. So when this task was set up similar to how it was in study 1 and study 2, the more guilt prone they were, the less likely they were to say, hey, have my payments combined with this really competent other person. In the disjunctive payment structure, we don't see any significant effect. And in fact, if anything, it's headed in the other direction. Yeah?
I think you explained this, I'm sorry. But,
No.
So in the additive payment structure, would presumably their decision affect their partner, or is it
Yes.
just the lab? Okay.
Yes. Yes, it would affect their partner. I guess in theory it also affects the lab, how much of my research budget is affected, but that seems to weigh little on the minds.
Is that coverage very hard to get across? Because if I'm a participant, I might think, wait a minute, why do I get to pick? Did they ask the other person the same question? What if we pick different things? Did they flip a coin? Like, did you have to explain?
Yeah, we told people that I believe we told people that they were randomly selected to make the choice. But yeah, it's something that we really had to think about because it is kind of odd, like what gives me the right to make this decision for somebody? And in post-experiment discussions with one of the research assistants, he indicated that there were a couple of people who did find it odd that they alone were the one choosing.
It's a really similar question.
Yeah.
Following up on that, are they told that their partner will know that they made the decision, or that their partner will not? Especially in the fast friends, if they might see the person again, maybe they're getting new best buds, and it's like, oh, you screwed me out of $2.
Right. They were not, so really they weren't told either explicitly. It was like, these are the 2 payment options, you're the one who gets to choose, but we didn't say we won't tell the other participant that there was a choice, or nor did we say that we will tell the other person that there's a choice.
Did anyone raise that in the sort of follow-up discussion?
Not from my conversation with the experimenter, but I could see that, I could see how that could affect things, so that there'd be an element, I would expect stronger effects for shame in that condition when there is that potential for a conversation about it, when there's that knowledge that, like, hey, you chose this. It's the coworker discovering that there's red wine on the carpet. Yeah, I would expect stronger effects for shame, but that's interesting. Okay. For study 4, we wanted to test dyads that had real relationships. So we I used my MBA students and asked them, administered a couple of questionnaires. One at the beginning of the term to get their guilt proneness scores and levels of expertise, and then a survey later in the term to get them their choices about whether they would want their operations grades averaged with another student who was either of really high ability in operations or low ability in operations. We manipulated in this experiment whether the partner was high or poorly performing. And then we also manipulated whether it was a classmate or a close friend based on some of the work done at UCLA and in Alan Fisk's lab. We thought maybe in a communal sharing mode there might be different effects than there would be if these were just classmates where there's more equality matching or market pricing. Sadly, we didn't find very interesting effects, so I'm not going to have a whole lot to say about that, but I don't think we really investigated it enough thoroughly enough to make any bold claims about whether this would be the same or would be different, depending upon the mode, the relational model. Okay. All right. So what we see here is again probability of choosing interdependence on this y-axis. The more guilt-prone the person was in this expert classmate partner and expert partner close friend, there we see a downward sloping line such that guilt proneness is negatively correlated with the probability of choosing interdependence. If it's a non-expert partner, people aren't that fussed, nor are they particularly likely to want to pair their outcomes with these people. We changed the question from interdependence to independence to interdependence with this high-performing or low-performing other relative to a person who's performing similarly in the class. And what we find here is expert partner, close friend, and to some extent, though somewhat lower, expert partner, classmate. You see that same negative slope, such that the guilt-prone people are not wanting to form interdependent relationships with these people. Okay, so just to summarize what I've talked about so far, highly guilt-prone people avoid interdependencies with competent others, particularly when they have concerns about their own competence. They're sacrificing financial gain in these experiments, and that actually produces a really nice effect that highly guilt-prone people are free riding less often. So it's it's reassuring that there's a group of people out there who have the opportunity to free ride on others' performance, and they're not doing it. Okay, so I talked about that. That suggests that competence is not always desirable in partners, and suggests that these inequity concerns are predicting which relationships form. And as a result, it suggests that not only that situations shape our behavior, but that our behavior, our personality is influencing which situations we put ourselves in. Are we putting ourselves in an interdependent relationship? Are we putting ourselves, are we avoiding those relationships? Okay, there are a number of things I'd like to do to follow this up. I'll talk about some of these right now, but some of the longer term work may be looking at relational models and whether they're equally, whether these effects are equally strong across relational models. Now, the project that Maeva is leading is looking at guilt proneness and continuing and failing relationships. So here, you're already in the relationship, you feel the bond to the person, it's not going very well. If you feel like you're at fault, do you cut bait or do you decide to go all in and keep yourself in that relationship? And we thought it could be interesting if guilt proneness both makes people more likely to avoid interdependent relationships, but also more likely to stay in them once they're there. So we had 300 participants. We had some guilt and shame proneness measures, the ones that I've shown you before. We also looked at guilt repair. So one of the subscales from that guilt and shame proneness questionnaire asked about guilt repair tendencies. I'll show you that in a second. We had a filler task. We gave them a vignette, which I'll describe in a second, and it basically described a failing partnership where they may or may not have been to blame. And then we also measured some risk tolerance, which we can control for or don't have to control for and find the same effects. But let me tell you about the guilt repair items first. These are all about finding out that you've done something wrong and wanting to fix it. So You're privately informed that you're the only one in your group that did not make the honor society because you skipped too many days of school. Are you going to change this behavior? Are you going to repair this behavior pattern? On the second one, you reveal a friend's secret. The friend never finds out. What's the likelihood you're going to change your behavior going forward? It's all about changing your behavior. Just to remind you of the guilt proneness, this is the negative behavior evaluation. Here are the items here. You've seen these before. So first set of items that I just showed you about changing your behavior, this is about feeling bad about that behavior. And here's the vignette. You're the co-owner of a furniture company that was profitable in the first year, but not in the 3 years since. You, your partner, or you and your partner both, depending upon the condition, have suggested and implemented a number of bad ideas. It is either clear or unclear who is to blame. And you have this choice. Do you continue with this partnership, or do you say that's it? If you discontinue, your options are pretty good. So you've got a place to go. You've got a soft landing here. But your partner's options are not so good. 4 conditions. First, you're to blame. Like you were the one who came up with the bad ideas. Second condition is it's unclear. It might have been your bad ideas. It might have been your partner's bad ideas. We just don't know. Third condition, equal blame. You've both had these bad ideas. Fourth, it's your partner who's had these bad ideas. And what we find here, again, here the DV is the likelihood of ending the relationship. We find, and this is guilt repair, and that's the guilt negative behavior evaluation. We find that the higher you score on guilt repair in the ambiguous blame or the self-blame condition, the less likely you are to end the relationship. You feel responsible, you want to repair it, and the way you can repair it is by sticking in this relationship. We find a similar sort of pattern strongly for the self-blame condition. This line is non-significant here, but this line is the non-significant one here. But the pattern, regardless of the scale that you look at, is that when people think that sticking in the relationship is going to produce less negative consequences for the other person, that's what they'll do. So it's all about their concern for the other person's outcomes. It's not necessarily that they want to avoid all forms of social interaction. Study 2, we followed it up, and we used a very similar methodology, but we also looked at how much investment each person had in the relationship. So we first had the equal investment condition, which looked very similar to the previous experiment, where it's you have a partner or you do things equally. Second one, you're the primary person. You've invested 80% of the money for the startup costs. It's your idea. Your partner is involved. Yes, there's an input, but this is primarily all about you. And we thought playing around with these percentages may affect how concerned people were with their actions on the other person. It could be if you make these stakes high enough so that it's all about the self, you don't see a whole lot of effects of guilt proneness. And what we find here, again, likelihood of ending the partnership in the self-blame and the ambiguous blame conditions, they're less likely to end the partnerships. And this is, again, the equal investment condition. Same sort of pattern of effects if you use the guilt negative behavior evaluation scale. But in the unequal investment, we see similar patterns, but they're not as strong, are they, Matha? Okay, so they're not as strong. They look like they're in the same direction, but it is mitigated to some extent. Okay, so the big story here is that it's not just about wanting to get out of these social relationships and ending all interdependencies. It's about managing the impact of one's own actions. And sometimes the best way to make sure you're not hurting other people is not forming those interdependencies. But sometimes once you're actually entangled in these relationships, you feel more compelled as a result of your guilt to stay in those relationships. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say about guilt proneness today. now I want to talk about a project that's related, looking at escalation of commitment, that I foreshadowed a little bit earlier. This is a paper that Becky Schomburg at NYU and I published earlier in the year. And it is about escalation of commitment to failing pro-social initiatives. So do you guys remember DARE? So almost all of you do. It was a big drug abuse. It's called Drug Abuse Resistance Education. And it was this big program. I remember in schools people having these black T-shirts with red DARE all around, and it was a huge effort. And it was not the most effective of projects. There's been a lot of research showing that giving people this drug abuse resistance education actually starts them thinking about drugs and thinking, huh, I see some upsides. And so exposing people to this not only did not reduce rates of drug use, in some ways it increased drug use. So it was not the most effective of programs. And yet, it still continues. It's changed a bit, to their credit, but it still continues. I recently, like 2 months ago, I got into an argument in front of our local CVS store because there was a DARE, like 2 guys wearing DARE T-shirts trying to raise money for DARE. And I got into my little professor mode and like, in a little lecture on how ineffective it is and how we need to monitor all of this. But it was inappropriate. I went too heavy on that. Anyway, it is a failing, it's a pro-social initiative. I did feel guilty about that. I was like, they didn't need that. They're trying to help. Yeah, maybe it's not the best program, but maybe it's better now than it had been. No? Okay.
Did you make them feel guilty about it?
I don't think so. Maybe, but I didn't see any visible reaction to indicate that. A lot of money dumped into it, even after we knew that it's not the most effective of programs. That's the larger point here. Another program is less well known, the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. Is anybody familiar with these? So there's a big problem in the 80s and 90s. You've got a lot of kids, at-risk youth, who really don't have anywhere to go after school. Their parents are working. If you leave these kids to their own devices, this population is likely to get themselves into trouble. So what do? You create this safe space, create somewhere for them to go. It turns out if you create this space for them to go to, and you don't provide any supervision, they just become better organized in their mayhem. And so it too is not a very effective social program, and still tens of millions of dollars was dumped into this program before the studies, and even as the studies started showing that it's not the most effective use of the money. So these sorts of things got me to question, like, well, why? Why are we escalating commitment to these failing programs? Why don't we just take a step back and realize, hey, this is not the most effective use of money? And in a lot of ways, the answer could be, well, we escalate commitment in all sorts of different areas of life. This is a nuclear power plant in New York that went massively, massively over budget, billions of dollars over budget, tens of years, like more than 10 years over, and the people just keep investing money because it's commitment and consistency, like here's what we're going to do, and we need to get ourselves thinking that this is, I need to think of myself as a wise decision maker, and so I'll continue investing resources in this idea even though it's not working. You see this with the Vietnam War. You see it in the NBA draft. One of the most famous papers on this looked at NBA coaches' decisions to play highly drafted players who are not very good. And it happens that if you're drafted highly, the coach and the general manager think like, well, we've invested a lot in this person, and so that you continue to get playing time even though you may have less heralded colleagues who are actually more beneficial for the team. So people escalate commitment in lots of areas. In some ways, it's therefore not so surprising that we escalate commitment to these moral initiatives. But if we think about why people escalate commitment, we can break it down. First, that you want to appear intelligent, both to yourself, like I want to feel like I made the right decision, but I also don't want a whole bunch of fans or citizens of the United States questioning my decision, so I'm just going to commit to one thing, keep going with it. That's going to make me appear more competent, more intelligent. It's going to allow me to save face and just generally be consistent. And Barry Stahl has done work on this. Joel Brockner at Columbia has also done a lot of work on this. What I would argue, but both Becky and I argue, is that there are a couple of extra reasons why you might escalate commitment in a pro-social initiative that aren't there or are not as strong in a project that just has egoistic or self-oriented aims. And that's to feel moral or to appear moral to other people. We know from a lot of moral psychology research that our efforts to help other people make us feel good about ourselves. It really boosts our self-regard. Observers see high effort as indicative of moral character. Most religions, and you guys probably know this better than I do, have stories of self-sacrifice and the virtue of self-sacrifice, and this can be a really effective thing of getting people an effective way to get people to cooperate for the benefit of the group. And we find that it really does make people feel good. Volunteering predicts positivity of the self-concept. So there's something about trying to be moral that is intrinsically rewarding to us. Now, when, in most cases, these are good things, but when you have projects like these, where you continuing to dump efforts into it feels good, but the outcomes or the consequences of that, aside from it making you feel good, are not very positive, that's where you've got a situation that's kind of quizzical and maybe one that we need to spend a little time re-examining. Okay, here are the hypotheses, formally. People are more likely to invest effort beyond a point that is economically rational, that is, escalate commitment, to courses of action that have pro-social aims than they are to egoistic aims. And the second hypothesis just says that this desire to be moral and have a positive moral self-regard is what's responsible for this effect. Okay. In the first study, we had 112 students. We had them do a word unscrambling task. And we varied who benefited from this word unscrambling task. Our dependent variable was the time spent on the anagrams, and specifically, what percentage of the people invested an amount of time that just economically does not make sense. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Okay, so here's a very easy word unscramble. ATMH can be used to unscramble to spell the word math. Here's the payment matrix. Pardon me. So what you'll see is that there are two columns. The column on the left is the amount of money you make if you are not able to correctly unscramble at least 8 of the 10 words. Okay, and so the amount of money you make depends upon how much time you spend solving these anagrams. And you have the option to quit whenever you like. On the column on the right has the amount of money you'd make if you're able to unscramble 8 of the 10 words, at least 8 of the 10 words. What's interesting is what happens at 6 minutes. At 6 minutes, you should stop. Like, you're better off stopping and not getting 8 of the 10 words. So all your financial incentives are structured that you should stop before you get to that 6-minute mark. And we took this measure from Ku's 2008 paper. Okay. Manipulation of moral relevance was as follows. In one condition, they were earning money for themselves. So the monetary amounts that you just saw, they'd get that, and we actually did pay people those amounts. In a second condition, they weren't getting the money, it was for charity. Okay? Now you could think, well, people want to feel smart. You know, these are college undergrads, they're a good college. Maybe what's motivating them is feeling smart. And therefore, you might expect that when there's monetary cost to themselves, so there's an opportunity cost from feeling smart, maybe you get less escalation of commitment in this pro-self condition than you would here when there's really no financial cost to themselves. There's a financial cost for the charity, but That's a charity. That's not their own money. So we included a third condition, themselves and a charity. So here, they'd get the money and the charity would get the money. And what we were expecting is that this condition would look a lot like this condition. Because in both cases, it feels good to try to help. And that's what we saw in study 1. We see that the rate of escalation of commitment beyond 6 minutes was less than 40%. In the self condition, in the other two conditions, it was above 60%. Study 2, very similar design. This time we wanted to look at why this is happening. So we asked them, to what extent were you motivated on this task by a desire to feel warm and caring? And to what extent were you motivated on this task by a desire to feel smart and competent? If you look at warm and caring, not surprisingly, they're not very motivated in the self condition by these concerns, because it's not clear how solving anagrams for your own benefits makes you either warm or caring. Charity condition higher, self and charity condition somewhere in between. We see similar rates of escalation of commitment that we did in study 1, both in the self and charity condition. In the charity condition, it is higher than it is in the self condition. And again, this is in our estimation, driven by their desire to feel moral. So working makes me feel moral, therefore I work longer. And so we found a 95% confidence interval that did not include 0, suggesting evidence of mediation. And then so we felt pretty good about those results, but we thought this is not going to be true for everybody. If the psychology is as we're proposing, it should really matter to those people who place a lot of importance on being moral. Like, not everybody walks around and like, how am I going to be moral today? And what are the ways that I can help? Some people are great, some people aren't. So Aquino and Reed have this measure of moral identity, and there are two components to their measure of the moral identity. First one is an internalization, and this dimension captures how much people believe that their moral identity is reflected in their inner thoughts and feelings. So it's very internal. It is the dimension that's been more often shown to be predictive of moral behaviors. Symbolization, by contrast, captures people's awareness of themselves as social beings whose actions affect others. It's looking for consistency. It's looking at the extent to which people feel that their morals are reflected through their actions. Now that's kind of tricky because that could just be social presentation. People who want to look good, who wear T-shirts that, it's like Earth Day or something like that. So it could be all about social display. But it could also be the people who really do want to act based on this internal set of feelings. And there's been some disagreement about what symbolization is really tapping into. We thought it was possible that either internalization, like how important is being moral to you, or symbolization, how important is it that your actions reflect your morality, might be responsible, might moderate our effects, such that people high in either form of moral identity might be more likely to escalate commitment when they're faced with this pro-social initiative. And that just says that more formally. Okay, so 83 students, we had the moral identity measure. We had them do a remote associates task for money. This is a task where I give you 3 words. You give me a 4th word that's related to each of the 3 words I provided. So if I said shoulder, sore, hot, you would say cold, and that's the word. They were more difficult than that one. And our dependent variable, again, was time spent on the puzzles, the remote associates in this case. And we see a similar pattern to the first couple of studies. We see highest rates of escalation of commitment in the charity condition, somewhat attenuated, more attenuated than they were in the first and second experiments for the self and charity condition, and pretty low rates of escalation of commitment in this self condition. If we look at symbolized moral identity, we find that in the self condition, not much is going on. Symbolized moral identity is not affecting their behavior there, but it is affecting their behavior in the other two conditions, such that you get greater escalation of commitment on people that place a high importance on being moral, leading us to conclude that yes, it is this desire to be moral that's really driving the higher rates of escalation of commitment there. Now, we found nothing for the internalized dimension of moral identity. There's no effect at all, nothing's close to an effect, which was surprising to us. So it makes me, conclude's too strong of a word, but it makes me think that there is something beyond social presentation in this symbolized dimension of moral identity. That, like, there are people who really are concerned about not showing, but acting morally. And it may not be the same set of people who are just have this internal moral compass. Yes?
So did you run the guilt questionnaire?
We didn't run the guilt questionnaire.
You might think that somebody with a high proneness to guilt would feel he had to quit at 3 minutes in order not to cost the charity money.
Yeah, it's entirely possible. But it's also possible, I think, that people with high guilt proneness would keep working because they historically more work ties to better outcomes for others. Yeah, it would be interesting. I'd love to run it again, testing for that. Okay, so
You did check to make sure they understood that they were actually costing their charity money every minute they spent on this.
At the end, yes. Not everybody is aware. Some people kind of gloss over that. In retrospect, I think it would have been nice to stress that. If we hammer over the head with it too much, I don't think we'd get an effect, but yeah, that's important. Okay, so to summarize, people are particularly likely to escalate commitment to failing initiatives when those initiatives have pro-social aims, and the reason is that doing so makes them feel moral. Symbolized moral identity accounted for the effect, didn't find anything at all in terms of internalization. So this would suggest that this desire to be warm, caring, or this desire to be moral affects resource allocation in some novel ways, some ways that we haven't talked about in the literature on escalation of commitment before. The desire can drive escalation of commitment. And I think it suggests that it may be worthwhile to have more of an open discussion with leaders of nonprofits and get the word out to charitable organizations that it's especially important for them to be monitoring the effects of their initiatives, such that they're funneling the money and the resources and the time toward those projects that are more productive. Because helping feels so good, there may be the temptation to just keep helping without taking the time to analyze whether that help is being administered in the most effective way possible. Yes?
So I'm freaked out by the symbolized morale. I'm not familiar with the scale. So there's the internalized and the versus the symbolized.
Right.
And the controversy was whether the symbolized is really just about people who like to
Showing
signal
it,
and display their virtue.
Right.
And then you find nothing for people who feel that acting in a moral way is part of their intrinsic character.
See, being moral is part of their intrinsic character. It's not acting in a moral way.
I see.
That's why it's so confusing, because that acting is really more associated with the symbolized, because the actions are generally public.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, do you think from a functional point of view that what's going on is with these symbolic people could be really about display? In other words, that what the mechanism that is trying to achieve is display?
It's possible, but I don't think so because of the way the experiment was set up. They could be trying to impress the experimenter, unless we find a more automated way to do this, so that there truly would be no interaction with anybody. It'd be hard to rule that out completely, but it was in a pretty private setting. So they're in a private cubicle there isn't somebody right there monitoring something, monitoring them. And that leads me to think that it's not about just showing this to
And there was no
other
other
people.
personality measures or individual differences that could sort of convergently paint a portrait of these symbolic morality people. We don't.
Not that I'm aware of. And I've read, I think, just about everything that's been done on symbolized moral identity right now. But it would be interesting for personality researchers to dive into it. Because I mean, like, so many of us have this gut reaction to people who are advertising their morality as like these goody two-shoes who are self-righteous, and like, you know, I have that reaction despite studying morality. So I'm sure it's out there in the real world as well. Yeah. Are
It seems
there?
like that'd be an important thing to do, follow up, is to sort of, you know, figure out who these people are.
Yeah.
What's their deal?
I actually have a nonprofit foundation that's devoted to, I can sell you a t-shirt.
Tell us more about it.
Any other questions?
Are you, is that your last slide? Are you
Yes.
done?
Yes.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thanks. No. That is my
I
last
just wanted
slide.
to make sure that we could open it up for
Yes.
questions. Great.
So, kind of tying together a couple of the strands here, Mark asked about guilt in the escalation of commitment study, and I have a conjecture, okay, which is that that guilt is very important, and it's not just impression management, and that, and this is a wild conjecture, that guilt or something like it, I mean, these are, when I say something like it, these are English language folk terms for phenomena that are studied by American social psychologists with American subjects. So, you know,
Right.
it's not that there isn't some part of the universal human psyche that's being identified there, but we want to put some scare quotes around it to
Sure.
recognize the cultural framing on it. That it may be responsible for a lot of sunk cost fallacy reasoning in general. So not even in contexts of, I mean, I think that translational research with regard to nonprofits is useful, and I'm already thinking of people I want to tell this paper about, but why are they so prone to the Concord fallacy, right? The conjecture would be that any time that, say, waste is moralized, right, then a sunk cost is construed as wasteful if not utilized, right? So people are prone to continue adding cost in ways that are, you know, economically inefficient and often inefficient with regard to the goals that they themselves purport to value, right?
Yeah.
But it's because they have a conflict between one imperative, which is don't waste, right?
Right.
And some other set of objectives. And certainly this is the language that politicians use all the time, right? So when President Bush pushed the continued occupation of Iraq, it was all about the lives would have been lost in vain.
Right.
Right. And there, it's very clear what the moral connotations are, right? But I think that the Concorde itself was, you know, the original, the plane was in the same terms, which is, it would be, you know, a sin to have wasted the taxpayers' lucre on this venture, which we knew was going to fail. So we continue because we don't want to commit that larger sin of having wasted it.
Yeah.
So I think that there's potentially a broad application of guilt, and it isn't only limited to these, you know, special pro-social programs like the ones that you used as exemplars here. I mean, it's a testable conjecture.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's true or not.
So the line about children starving in China may have done some real damage.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, I hear people do this all the time, where I have to go to medical school because I've been a pre-med for 4 years,
Yeah.
and you know, it would be wrong to have wasted, you know, all of the investment to date in that, right? And my parents helped me and all the
Sure.
rest of it, right? And when you explain to them how the Concord fallacy works and what the accurate cost-benefit assessment should be, they have a really hard time grasping it, and they often seem to be struggling with moral concern. Right?
Yeah.
And this isn't, you know, helping kids in after-school programs.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Yes.
I'm just wondering, kind of building off of that and thinking about the, you know, public and private sort of manifestation of morality, or or of guilt and shame. I was wondering, with some of these, the later half of the studies, what do you think would happen, or have you done the experiments to see whether the investment, you're the only one who knows about the investment of time or effort or whatever, right? So if you had not told your parents that you were pre-med, but you were like, oh, I'm a bio major, but they don't know it's pre-med,
Right.
then are you less likely to feel that the obligation to go to medical school? I mean, it's just that kind of relationship between like, I'm publicly declaring that.
So there's been some prior research done on this, and absolutely, yeah, once you publicly declare something and you're publicly associated it, your risk of escalating commitment goes up.
Yeah. Can I ask another question?
Of course.
Dominating the floor. So I was curious about the symbolization and the sort of self-signaling aspect that it has
Yep.
versus the sort of shaming of others for not participating.
Oh,
'Cause
okay.
I actually kind of like, I don't know if I took offense or just like sort of disagreed with your like, oh, we all hate those people who wear those tree hugging T-shirts, because I don't know, I'm kind of a tree hugger, and like I'm generally like, yeah, people are doing something, and that's great.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how many people actually fall into like your boat versus my boat about, why are you wearing that T-shirt and being annoying. But I'm curious whether you might get some different personality features of people who are, signaling to promote their own position versus signaling to say, hey, I'm doing, you should be doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that there might be very different motivations going on there. I mean, it's not my area of research, I don't really know anything about it, but.
That's interesting. So if it's shaming to done, so in one case, if it's shaming other people, it's an impetus for action, so it's serving this useful purpose. But people like me are perceiving it as, you just said like self-promotion.
Like as an example, so I was walking on the beach yesterday, and like I always pick up trash on the beach, but I make sure that I do it like, I have like a bag and everyone can see that I'm picking up trash, because I feel like everyone should be doing it.
Okay.
And if if I'm on the beach and no one else is on it, I'm still gonna pick up trash, but I'm more likely to do it if there are other people there, because I feel like the display of my action is more likely to change other people's behavior if I do it in their presence.
So here's a case study that should adjudicate between them, which is when people go to the voting booth and they're offered the little I voted sticker, and they can discard it or they can stick it on their lapel. So Scott's somewhat
Cynical.
dark view
Yeah.
of the phenomena would be that people are more likely to advertise having voted in a case where the demographics support their position winning, provided that enough people vote.
Okay.
Right? So where turnout is a determinant of whether their position wins or not. And yours says that, in fact, the true test case is that they should be more likely under the opposite condition. I think voting is the right thing to do. Even if you want to vote for the opposite position from the one that I support, I will encourage you to vote because it's what moral actors do. So I'll put the vote I voted thing on, even though I know that if there's high turnout, then all the abortion clinics in Texas are gonna be 300 miles away or whatever it is, right? You see that? See how the test case, and that's an empirical one, because you can have an exit poll and you can just check and see whether people are wearing their little stickers or not.
Yeah.
I mean, the little stickers are an interesting phenomenon.
They are.
It's not exactly clear what the design is there, but it seems to have something to do with, I did the right thing and I want other people to do the right thing too.
Yeah.
At least that's the implicit goal.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't even thought of that perspective.
Different test of the same question.
Okay.
So you do a continuous evaluation survey, how much would you pay for a, Save the Whales bumper sticker for your car,
Okay.
right? So then you're demonstrating, right? And how much would you pay to have a Save the Whales placard on a taxi?
Okay.
Which you're not driving, and therefore you're advertising the position, but not your
I love
association with it.
That's cool.
You're probably getting a bigger bang for your buck on the taxi.
Right, but bigger bang for your cause buck, but a smaller bang for your
For
holier than thou
self-promotion.
buck.
Yeah.
Buck, so.
I like it.
In the news this weekend has been Lockheed Martin's claim that that they can develop a fusion reactor, small-scale fusion reactor, within, I think, 3 to 5 years, they're saying.
Huh.
And I've gotten emails from...
10 years to production.
Do they? Okay. And physicists I know, I've emailed them, they said it's nonsense. Now, their regular business is jet fighters.
Right.
Their biggest part of their business. And the F-35 is way over budget, you know, but they keep going after it, sinking money into it. I mean, it's not their money, it's government money.
Right.
Actually, numerous governments, other countries.
Okay.
And the F-22, I think it's still in development, it's like 30 years old. You know. So I'm wondering how, could it be that they haven't been sufficiently sanctioned for their previous sunk cost failures, that they've gone to this one which has a history, you know, fusion has a long history of people making wild claims.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that seems possible, that if you don't get enough negative reinforcement or punishment for doing that you just continue to do it because you really
Well,
have.
they get rewarded because they're
More money.
offered cost plus contracts, and so if the higher the cost goes, they get their 10% profit on a larger number. They make more money. Actually, I read that there was that the Obama administration changed that basis on some of the contracts that they put out, where it was a fixed bid contract, and you know, without the wiggle room,
Okay.
you can go into the negative territory on it and it worked really well.
Ah.
I mean, I forget what the project was. It was just in the news recently.
I just wanted to shift back to a previous point of discussion. So, you know, when Colin first came to UCLA, I implanted in him a little electronic device that lets me, you know, read his thoughts in ways that not everyone else can. So I actually heard him say something that I think he meant something different than what you think he meant.
Okay.
And I think it's an interesting point of discussion, so it's worth pursuing, which was on the question of symbolic morality versus what you were calling the internal compass, right?
Right.
So he said the design of the machine, right, the design of the mechanism. And my interpretation of that, and Colin, correct me if I'm misreading it, is that, so you've dichotomized essentially a Machiavellian impression management strategy,
Yep.
right? I don't give a damn about the whales, but it helps me get dates, so I wear the whales t-shirt or whatever.
Right.
In fact, I bought it at the, you know, at the used clothing shop where it cost a tiny fraction of what the actual donation would have been.
Right.
A purely manipulative strategy, right?
Right.
I really care about doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And those are your,
Yep.
right? And one reading, Colin, again, correct me if I'm
No,
misunderstanding.
I'm reading your reading, and
Yeah.
you're, yeah.
Your reading, my reading, your reading. Yeah.
It's been 4 years.
Yeah. Is that the evolved psychology that is responsible for what you want to call the true moral compass?
Yeah.
There's a machine in the head that was produced by natural selection, and it's the reason that it was favored by selection, given that all else being equal, individuals who incur costs in order to generate benefits for others will leave fewer descendants than those who don't.
Okay.
And therefore, the mechanism,
Right.
all else being equal, would be eliminated. The reason that it's been favored by natural selection is because there's payback in the future for being a good guy.
Okay.
Right? But only if people know that you're a good guy. Okay? So the true moral compass, the genuine moral sentiment, the praiseworthy individual and not the Machiavellian actor, at some level must be concerned, not at the level of conscious calculation, but must be concerned about other people knowing about her actions. Because if she doesn't, you know, if she's monkish in her altruism, right, then the trait is dysfunctional. Right? And that's a different set of possibilities. And if that's on the table as what we would expect true morality to look like, then your kind of puzzlement about, well, I kind of suspect this measure of what symbolic morality is, and maybe there's more to it than that. Well, maybe what it's capturing is something that we really just want to call morality, and it always has a public face to it to a certain extent. Right? And what you then want to differentiate is the calculated Machiavellian from the typical person. Right?
But Scott's response was that which I was pretty happy with, I'm still not doing this, was that given the nature of the study conditions, there wasn't a salient audience effect, there were no ice swaps or.
Sure, I understand that, but the measures themselves contain, I mean, that is, the questions themselves.
Exactly, they're tapping everyday life, everyday,
Right.
the extent to which this mechanism is expressed in this person.
And there are other things like measures of psychopathy, which really identify the true Machiavellian individuals. And I bet they don't line up with this symbolic morality.
No, I wouldn't think so. I think, possibly I wouldn't think so.
We should follow up on that, though. So, the genuine morality is advantageous only if there's good cheater detection, right? Because if my only goal is to leave as many descendants as possible, then I will act genuinely morally only when I can get caught out otherwise, and also do all the Machiavellian stuff.
Well, so
that doesn't work only if people have a nose for sociopathy.
Yeah, so there are a couple of responses to that. Alan Fiske has one variant of it, Robert Frank has another variant of it. They're basically that the design is for iterated interactions in small-scale situations, and that that the self-conscious monitoring is costly. People discount the future. They miscalculate probabilities of detection, right? And so, in the long run, it pays to be the good guy, because in the kind of environments where the morality evolved, on average, that would have been the better bet, right? And that attempting to be calculating will often backfire because you'll get it wrong. I should say, just in terms of having all the possibilities on the table, there's an entirely different, there's one version that is not entirely different, and then there's an entirely different explanation. So there's biological group selection is one entirely different, really, really different explanation, which is that we're not, the relevant natural selection process wasn't about individual benefit, it was about group benefit. And then there's a kind of intermediate one, which is a gene culture coevolution one, which is that we have an individual psychology about reputation management and morality that expects there to be a cultural arena within which, within certain parameters, there's arbitrariness about what is good and bad, right? Whether drugs are good and whether drugs are bad, and the system just looks at the local, normative ecology and says, okay, well, in this world, this is what matters. And that's kind of it's not a biological group selection argument at all.
Time for one more question.
I want to see I've been asking a lot of questions today. Does anyone have a burning question?
Go.
All right, so on a more sunny note, maybe, I was very interested in the studies with regards to coordination and guilt.
Okay.
And that was kind of the way I saw it, was you had behavioral measures in which the outcome was either more beneficial for the overall dyad or not. And I was wondering, I don't know if it's true, maybe someone does, but I wouldn't be surprised if guilt proneness co-varies with being sympathetic and other regarding in various ways.
I think it does.
So I wonder if you have, because you mentioned that you looked at agreeableness, I wonder if you have other measures in your study that could speak to the possibility, not to say I don't believe that guilt has a major role to play, but that even within the guilt, there's mediation of just being able to foresee and value a positive outcome for a unit larger than the self, or to coordinate.
Mm-hmm. I think there would be. In terms of more general personality level variables, I think conscientiousness or the conscientiousness parts of that construct, I think, would be predicted here. One of the things that Daniel Ames and I have been kicking back and forth is the idea that there may be mispredictions about others' reactions to these transgressions. So imagine a guilt-prone person and a person low on guilt proneness, and we both imagine ourselves stealing your lunch. As a non-guilt-prone person, I might think, well, he's going to be mildly upset by this. And the guilt-prone person is like, he's going to be irate, he's never going to talk to me again. And the question is, who's right? Are the guilt-prone people generally more accurate, or are they overstating things? And I would agree that there are probably multiple components of guilt, and that maybe it's guilt proneness coinciding with this misprediction of others' reaction.
That's it. Well, I know we're out of time, we'll continue it over coffee, but I guess the nut of it I was trying to get at was maybe part of what's going on in the story is not just aversion to the pain of guilt,
Yeah,
but just even maybe not so effectively, but just cognitively, like a capacity to arrive at the outcome that is most beneficial.
Okay.
Or emotionally could even be the flip side being, you know, wanting to, the guilt-prone person may also be more pleased with a more beneficial outcome. But I don't know, that's speculation.
a more beneficial outcome for the dyad?
Yes,
Okay,
yeah. But anyway, we're.
okay, let's talk.
Yeah.
Thank you.